Let's think. I met John 25 years ago about when we shared a table just by chance at Patty's in Burbank. When I met John. He was funny, smart, he's very political, and he loved the entertainment industry. Those who knew John was complicated. He had a very tough childhood. When he was young, his father was a mortician and he got polio. And John was told that his dad wasn't going to survive. I think he went to the hospital a couple times to say goodbye. But, his dad was a survivor, and he did. He also, when he was better, his father ended up in a wheelchair. So as a quadriplegic, but he survived polio. But he had ambition, and so he ended up becoming a lawyer. And John and his brother Philip helped him through school so that he could become a lawyer, their fathers. John, he was a tough kid, okay? Well, he told me all the time, he got into lots of fights, okay? And so he just did, he was fighting all the time. But, so what he did, when he was old enough, he joined the Coast Guard, okay? And that really changed him, and it straightened out his life, and it really changed him. Now, he was a tough kid, and he put himself in very tough situations. He ended up being stationed in the Olympic National Forest in the state of Washington on an Indian reservation, the Quileute Indian Reservation. And the stories that John would tell me were like unbelievable stories. I mean, really unbelievable. So much so that, of course, we went and tried to sell it, right? Of course, we went to TriStar Television, we pitched the idea, and they loved it. And then we took it to Fox, and we pitched all these ideas, and they loved it. Of course, they did the pilot, we didn't get picked up. Okay, some of the stories that he told, I remember, these were, John kind of lived on the edge. And like I say, a lot of the stories he told me, there was one that really impacted him greatly. But when he was in the Coast Guard, there was like a pleasure boat, and people had gotten into trouble in the water. And so they had to go and save these people. So him and another Coast Guard buddy ended up in the water. And now the water was so bad, they had rescued some people, but they couldn't be picked up. The water was so bad, the boat couldn't get close enough to get them out of the water, because if they got too close, the waves were so huge, it was dangerous. And I think with the helicopters, they didn't call them, whatever it is. So him and his buddy were in the water. And at some point, his buddy couldn't make it. And so he saw right there, he's yelling at his buddy, you can do it, and his buddy perished right in front of him. But not John. John was a fighter, and he survived. Actually, I do remember he probably spent a little bit extra in the Coast Guard, because when he was supposed to get out, I think he got into a fight, so they gave him 6 extra months. That was John. So after John got out of the Coast Guard, he loved taking photographs. He always did. And so he pushed himself into the world of news. I mean, I think he walked into some place one day and said, I'll answer phones. And then from there, he moved up, and he became a cameraman. Now, because he had lived a life where he was saying, Barbara, I was 21 years old, and I was in charge of lives and millions of dollars, because these boats that he was driving, they were very, very expensive. And so he went into news, and as a photographer, he was the one who would always push it. Whenever the shot was, if it was a little too dangerous, it would be I'm going. And he would do it, and he would get the shot. And also in that time, because it was a while ago, I think he had to carry those of you who know, the 3/4-inch deck, if anybody remembers, and a heavy camera. So he would be running around, I don't know, 50, 40 pounds on him, as he's running around shooting and get all the shots. But he loved it. And he also got to do a lot of different things. He's always very proud that he got to film. I think it was he got to film 4 or 5 presidents, Bush, Reagan, a bunch of people. He also at one point, because he was in Seattle, and when Mount St. Helens erupted, he was like one of the first news photographers on the scene, and he got like the most gorgeous footage of Mount St. Helens erupting, which ended up being on Nightline, and he was very proud of it, and he kept like giving footage for Nightline. And I know over the years, John and I would be at home watching like a documentary, and also be in Mount St. Helens, and he'd go, oh, that's my footage. So he was always very proud of that. So after a while, John decided he didn't want to do news photography. He just, you know, he always wanted to grow. He became like a news producer, and then he became a producer. In Seattle, he had his own production company. His friend Joe Coppola, they directed, they did it. He did all kinds of things. And then eventually, you know, John always wanted more. So he moved from Seattle and came to Los Angeles. And he had only been there a couple of months, and then we met. And I had recently left Movie Time/E. And, you know, it's an interesting thing. I've always worked for people. And John always was the kind of guy, he really didn't honestly like working for other people. Like, surprise, surprise. John kind of liked calling the shots, and he liked doing his own thing. And so, you know, I've been working at Movie Time, and then at some point, we kind of like thought, well, let's see if we could do something together. So we started a company together. We worked on everything, you name it, all kinds of things. But you all know John, and John really had a love of comedy. He did. And so that was something, you know, John really had a wonderful sense of humor, and comedy was his thing. One of the first things we did, which we're really, really happy to do, because like a little special for NBC. I'm not trying to talk about our resume, but we did have Kelsey Grammer, Jason Bateman, Tony Shalhoub, Tommy Davidson, had a bunch of comedians. And we were hoping to be a pilot for a series. It didn't, but the show aired. But it was like, you know, comedy, which is something that he really loved. The interesting thing, just to reflect a little bit too, is that, you know, why did John love comedy so much? I mean, some of you who know him might know why, but you know, he really did, growing up, he had a lot of hard things when he was growing up. And Philip and his brother, John and his brother Philip, they used humor for everything. I mean, they had dark humor. Am I right, Terry? Yes. Right. They had dark humor. And they would laugh at stuff you would be like, really, like the Axelson boys, they'd be like cracking themselves up about stuff that we would be like, is that a little, you know, too dark? Yeah. So he always did. And it really was his favorite thing. So John and I, we were together for a while, and we got married. Now, the day we got married, because John was dedicated to work, and I was too, and whatever it was, but the day we got married, we literally took the red eye back to Miami, so that, because John was working on a show called Tens. I think it had a different name, and then he renamed it Tens, I believe, something like that. They had the people who were running the show, they had some very very straight, hosty type of people, and John's like, no, this is not going to fly. And so he went to comedy clubs. If my story's wrong, you can correct me, but I think he went to comedy clubs, and he found an unknown comedian called Daniel Tosh, and everyone called him DT. And so he hired Daniel. And I know he really liked DT, or Daniel's sense of humor. I mean, because he pushed the envelope. John told me the story about where one day he went into the office, and there was Daniel sitting at his desk, no clothes on, right? Totally naked. And I think John walked in, wasn't going to give him this. It was like, hey Daniel, good morning. Okay guys, it's time for our meeting. Wouldn't give him the time of day, Daniel's there waiting to get reactions. So that was the kind of humor John liked. Pushed the envelope, but he wasn't going to give him a break about it, you know what I mean? I also have to say, of all the shows that he worked on, I really know that the very classy show called Strip Poker was one of his favorite shows. You know, he loved it because John wouldn't love a room filled with very cynical, bitter comedy writers. Am I right, Mike? that a room filled with what? How many writers? 8, 10 at a time? I mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it was a room filled with comedy writers. And that, I think that's John's idea of like bliss, you know? And the thing about John too is that, you know, what you would respect about him was he was hard on himself, and then he would be hard on others. It would be like, is it funny enough? You know what I mean? So he was always pushing the comedy envelope because it was his humor, but that's who he was. And he expected a lot, but he loved, I mean, he loved comedy writers. He loved comedians. It's just humor was a big, big part of his life. So then, I know, you know what, he also, and I know he worked on, a bunch of different things. I also know he worked on The Man Show with Mark and stuff like that, and some other people here. And he would come home and tell stories, and also, I mean, I know it was a show, it was just him. That's, you know, it was his passion. It really was, you know, what he loved to do. The interesting thing is I wanted to mention, I don't know why, but, you know, the day actually that we sold strip poker, the day that we said it was a go, was the day, Rylan, you were born. That was the day you were born. But it was like, we sold strip poker and your son's being born, okay? And then the funny thing is, when we were doing another show in Miami, in Las Vegas, and it was called Diva Detectives, and we were working, and then we were doing great. Actually, that's when Gus was born, right after that. So it's like, it seemed to be when we were doing great shows and wonderful things, we were really blessed to have our children born, Rylan and Gus. The other thing, you know, I just want to mention a couple of things about John. You know, besides comedy, you know, politics was very, very important to him. He was hardcore Democrat. I put that little Clinton thing out there. I found it. He you know, campaigned with Obama. That was a really important thing. And you know, his news days. And I thought that was, you know, he always was very, very passionate about politics. He knew everyone. He knew what it was all about, and he brought that into our lives. And you know, and he brought it into my life. So I really was grateful that he did that. So the thing that I'm trying to think of. So, you know, after, you know, the kids, you know, everybody also knows, if they know John, they know that, you know, Rylan and Gus are probably, you know, the most important, you know, people in his life, and he would always talk about them. You know, the past few years, John was very fortunate. He met someone named Liz, and they've been together for the past like 4.5 years, and so he was very lucky to have Liz in his life. The thing I kind of want to just say is that, a couple things. You know, when I talk about John's dark sense of humor, or his good sense of humor, it's not always dark. A couple of weeks ago, he was not feeling very good, and I went over to pick up the boys at his house with Liz. And I could see he's being kind of stressed and stuff like that. Now, over the years, I always loved to do yoga, and I'm like, John, you should do yoga. And he's like, yoga, like that kind of thing. And so I walked into the house, whatever, and picking up the boys, and I'd say, you know, John, you are feeling stressed. You know, I said, you know, me pushing him a little bit, it's like, you know, don't you think it's time for yoga? And John, without missing a beat, he goes, Barbara, didn't you see driving up the hill? Didn't you see that sign? I go, no, what sign? He goes, yoga-free zone. You know what I mean? So like that was John, immediately saying, really, you're going to give me a little crap? I'll give you a little crap back, Barbara. No yoga for me. And, you know, he was always very quick, you know, and that's just who he was. You know, the thing that